Hey there everybody, it's Nathan Cool with nathancoolphoto.com, and in this episode I want to show a technique that you can use that works almost every single time to correct color when you're doing interior real estate photography. Now you know I've shown other ways to do this. I've got stuff throughout my books on real estate photography. There's a lot that goes on with trying to get that correct color throughout the inside of a house, and sometimes it isn't just one method that always works. Now you know that we tend to use auto white balance. There's always someone who questions, why do we use auto white balance? Why don't you just use a gray card? Well, a lot of that, as you know, if you've done real estate photography long enough, that we have a big area that we're trying to get the light just right, and we also are under a time constraint. So auto white balance gets us close, but it will never get us quite there. More important though is as you incorporate flash, or even if you're doing HDR, you're going to have some color casts from other things. So unlike doing portrait photography where you're going to have a lot of controlled light, or you're outside doing portraits or landscape photography, you're going to have a cacophony of lights that will vary from property to property depending on what a person has inside of their house. Could be fluorescent lights, LEDs, incandescent lights, sunlight that's coming in. So anyways, there's always going to be color casts, always going to be a challenge, and there's also white balance that will differ from camera to camera based on the algorithms that are being used. So what I'm going to do here is show one way that's almost a surefire bet using Photoshop to imitate the algorithm principles that are used inside your camera. Now, it's going to be very simple. I promise you don't have to do any math on this, but there's two steps in every auto white balance algorithm that achieves this. So I'm going to start by showing how that works with a very simple example, and then I'm going to show two very complex examples that were very challenging for color, but were fixed in a snap. So let's get started. So I've got three examples here. This one's going to be very simple. You can see this is a very small bathroom with a little bit of an orange cast to it. We're going to get into this, which has a lot of color casts coming into it. And then we're going to get into here, which you may recall from another angle from a recent video that I did. And you can see there's a lot of color casts that's happening here. And if we tried to change just the white balance, you can see we'd have challenges because we have different casts that are on the ceiling compared to what may be underneath of the cabinet counters. So we need to have a more controlled way to do this, so it's more than just changing our white balance sliders. Let's move over here to our very simple example. If we take a look at the before, this was just the ambient shot. This is in normal mode, and of course this shows a lot of the problems we'd expect from auto white balance in normal mode. So there are different lights that are in here that are casting different colors. So that's why we use our ambient layer, which is down here, and this layer here, that's in luminosity mode. It's a 50-50 flambient, and so that's just at 50%. By the way, if you're not familiar with flambient and this technique using flash and ambient, then you might want to take a look at the interiors book that I have on real estate photography. Links to all my books, links to other videos down in the description for this video. Moving on here though, our base layer is our flash layer. So this bottom layer here was just simply using flash. You can see that there's a little bit of orange cast hitting the ceiling. I just can't get rid of all of it. So I've got this little bit of a problem. Is that bad? I could probably deliver this, but let's correct it so that we can see what's going on before moving into a more complex example. To apply this technique, to fix this very quickly, you want to be able to take an average across the entire tonal range. This is step one of two that's done in auto white balance algorithms. So almost every auto white balance algorithm will first try to take some type of average of the acceptable limits of the tonal range and then do something with that. And that's something that I talk about in Mastering Color and Photography in one of my latest books. So what we want to do is the same thing here, and in Photoshop it's very easy to do. Let's just expose our flash layer only. So we'll start with this, and what we want to do is duplicate this layer. I'll do that by doing Control-J or Command-J on a Mac. Next, we want to go up to Filter, and we want to go to Blur, and then Average. And what that does is it just creates an entire color layer of the average color that was found across the scene. Now we want to adjust a curves layer across it, and this is what gives us the power of not just changing white balance. So go up to Layer, and we want a new adjustment layer, and we want that to be curves. You can call it anything you'd like. And now comes the easy part. You click the middle eyedropper. That's your gray point dropper to say that what you're going to select would be neutral gray. So you select that dropper and just select any color in there, and you can see it change the color. If we go in here really close and take a look now at this curve, we can see that the red dropped a little bit, the blues dropped, raised a little bit, but they went across a curve of the tonal range. Let's go ahead and hide this properties window. And now we don't need this layer down here that we used as our neutral layer, as our average. So now what we can do is we can turn off the on and off the curves layer and see how much it changed. Let's turn back on our ambient and luminosity, and now we have a much cleaner looking image. This is with that quick adjustment. This is without it. So it is subtle, just a little bit less orange. Once again, much better than if we had just left with the ambient shot, which this is what you'd be up against, for instance, using HDR, and you would try to do some corrections. So the same thing would apply here. You could apply this technique if you're using HDR by just using one of those layers and then establishing this curves layer. So anyways, that's a very simple one. These are just straight out of camera, by the way, just small corrections out of the pre-processing presets that I show, and there's no other correction. So we're not pumping these up. Let's move on to the next example real quick. So this has a lot of color cast. So this is what it looked like before, and you can see that's just horrific. So this is by the beach here in Southern California, Redondo Beach. A lot of sun was streaming in, so it's hitting this floor. It's naturally casting a lot of red all over the ceiling and also the paint everything. So it's got just color cast by nature, not just white balance. So we'll turn that off. That was the before. Now in this, I've got a variety of things going on. Let's start down at the bottom because this is a complex one. There's me holding flash because this requires 2 flashes like I showed in the last video, so I can try to get better color across the range. So this other layer here was just me holding a flash so I could edit myself out doing a bounce. This is then my ambient and luminosity mode, and then I did 2 window pulls. And I did 2 window pulls, and perhaps another video on that if you'd like, because there was a different exposure here having this window open. So having that window open, I needed to have a different exposure for that window pull. Anyways, let's go back out here. What I want to do is similar to what we just did before, but I want to make sure I'm only looking at the flash layers right now. And I want to have one combined image that I'm going to then neutralize. I'm going to do an average blur. So what I'm going to do is take both of those images, do a Control-J to duplicate both, and then you can merge those. There's many ways to do it. You can just right click over here and you can go to merge layers. There's also from the layers menu the ability to do that as well. Now we've got that one single image that we can once again go up to filter, blur, and average. And now we've got this color. So once again, we'll take an adjustment layer. That'll be a curves layer. So we'll go to layer, new adjustment layer, and it will be a curves layer. Once again, you can call it anything you'd like. Take that gray point dropper, the one in the center, click anywhere in there, and now look at how radically that curve changed across that tonal range. You can see the reds dipped down, but they didn't do so evenly. They did it in a curved manner. And also the blues did the same thing in the opposite type of curved manner. And that's what's critical here, is that this isn't necessarily just white balance, it's color cast. We can take a closer look at that by going to each channel. We can see red curved way down. We can see that the blue curved way up. And if we turn off that layer, we can then see why. We can see that a lot of those colors were around the tonal range where those light and the colors were peaking. And of course, the same thing with red. We'll go back here though to RGB, take a look at the whole thing. Anyways, we have something that radically altered something. We can see this looks a little bit too much. It pushed. So there's a very easy fix for that. First, let's turn on our other layers so we have a finished image. We're looking at the whole thing. So if this is too much, the fix for this is very simple. You merely change the layer's opacity of that curves layer. So let's drop that down to, let's say, about 54%. That looks probably good. We can change that to maybe 60%. That's probably about where I'd like it. Let's take a look at it though. This is with that adjustment. This is without it. So that changed a lot. And that looks a lot better than what we had. Much more accurate, and of course, way more accurate than if we had tried an ambient shot. And once again, if you're doing HDR, you would apply this to your ambient shot. At least one of them, put that curves layer at the top. Okay, let's move on to now the third example. And here's going to be something that I'm going to show here, which is a little bit different, a new take on doing this particular fix. So this is a very complex example, building off of my last video where you can see I have a color fill layer. And that was so that I could fix these areas that were over here because I had a little bit of an issue with flash reflection. So I did that color correction that I showed in the last video. So once again, this, if we were to work our way from top to bottom, here's our flash shot. You can see here's me filling in the other side wearing a chin diaper. Yes, there was nobody around, so I just put it down. Hello. So then I have the other shot, which is then over me over on this side. And by the way, there is a flash the whole time that's in the other room so I can get good color there. Similar to what I had talked about in the last video to make sure that we have the proper light distribution and then color distribution through the tonal range. So then I've got a color repair layer here, just in color mode for the color of the cabinets. And then I've got my luminosity mode. Now, if I had done it in normal mode, you can see this is what I was up against. It's way blown out here at the end. I've got all kinds of green color underneath of the cabinets here. This just looks like a real hot mess. So that's why just a little bit of ambient in luminosity mode down here is what helped out. Then I've just got two window pulls so I can get a little bit of these views outside. So now we want to fix this. Now there's two ways of doing it. We could do the exact same thing that we did before, but let's do it a little bit differently. Let's zoom out here just a tad. And once again, let's isolate our flash shots. We'll do that by just turning on these two layers down here. And once again, and we'll also take our color fill layer just to make sure. We'll take these layers, we'll duplicate them with Control J, and then we'll merge those. So we have that layer that we can work with and then later throw away. So we'll just merge those layers together. So we would normally now go to that filter and then to do an average blur, but we can do that with a more precise selection. So let's discount that there's a problem with the wood. Instead, let's take a polygon lasso tool and let's draw somewhat around the paint and somewhat around the ceiling. So we've got just this area to work with. Now we're saying that we think that the color cast is predominant across these areas, so let's try to figure out our gray point within this region. So it's the same thing though, just with the polygon selected. You go to Filter, go to Blur, and go to Average. So now we have that. You can deselect that with Control D. Now once again, we'll take a curves layer. So we go to Layer, and we want to have a new adjustment layer, Curves. And with that, we take that gray point dropper and just click anywhere on that selected area. Now we've got that curves. Now we can get rid of that other layer. So this gives us a lot more control for what we were looking at. Let's turn our layers back on here. So we've got luminosity and our window pulls put back in here. So this is with the color correction that we're seeing here. If I turn that curves layer off, you can see this is what we'd have. So this is looking pretty good. And once again, if you feel that is too strong, you just merely change the opacity of that layer. So you can see that it's more than just white balance. It's actually a whole lot of color casts. And by being able to change the color across the tonal range, then we're not just shifting some white balance sliders. We're able to have a lot more control of what's going on throughout the entire scene, and then subsequently the entire tonal range of that image. Well, I hope this video was useful for you and that you can use some of this in your photography as well. If you did like this video and you want to see more, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. It won't cost you anything. And as soon as one of these videos is posted, you'll be the first to know. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, take care, be safe, and get out there and shoot something.